In this episode, we're going to talk about getting into the game early. Building products in the deep tech world is difficult, and Boston Consulting Group report that they have made in global private investments in deep tech had shown that investments in deep tech has surged from 15 billion to 30 billion from 2016 to 2020 and reached a peak of 160 billion. Now, while that has come down somewhat, along with global private investments, deep tech's portion of VC funds still remain a large share. It has remained consistent at 20% of allocations. So when you start early, you have less competitors, you gain greater market share, and you have more time to build out the product. So when we talk about jumping in early, do we go ready, aim, fire? So you get ready, you aim, and then you fire. This is the approach that generally we think of doing things, right? You prepare, you plan, you strategize, and then once you've got it, you launch. It is methodical, it's calculated, it is safe, you know where you are headed. But in fast-moving environments, it may mean that you are taking a little bit longer than you should. And you could even get into what we call paralysis by analysis. You can be mapping it all out and missing the window of opportunity. What do you think, Khoong?
Yeah, I think in our previous episodes, we have always talked about how important it is to run fast. In order for you to enter quickly into the market, you need to really have the right product market mix. This concept of ready, aim, and fire. But of course, very often, many people, as you mentioned, get stuck with the aim because we are so nervous about trying to go into the market, and we just want to make sure everything is in the right place, then we enter. But in all previous episodes, we talk about the importance of being fast into the market. Because you have created a technology that may be able to create a completely new industry. You may be able to gain a tremendous advantage that you talked about, a competitive advantage. So you need to be fast. So how do you know how to do this? So there are many cases in which people will say being able to be ready, fire, then aim becomes the most important thing. That's a hallmark of success. That's something that needs to practice. Of course, it's not easy. So the question is, why would you want to do ready, fire, and aim? So it's precisely because we do not know. That's why we have to get into the market quickly, whatever market. We have to start talking to customers. We need to start to figure out what is it that they need so that we can then create a product that meets the product market mix. Now, it is always dangerous for us to create a product too early, thinking that we understand what the market needs and then go into the market. So even in the case of software, you could be like pouring concrete. No? You start to build something useful, and then you find out that at the end of the day, that's not exactly what the market wants. But because you're invested so much into creating this software product, that even software can be like concrete. You just cannot move on from there. You cannot go back to the beginning and fix everything. So sometimes it's good to remain agile so that you can move forward. So this whole idea of launching fast, learning fast, and correcting becomes an important feature of people in this industry, this journey of discovery.
Well, I totally agree with that. And as you know, when we talk about innovation cycles, and I spent quite a length of time in China, you see that it's much faster there than anywhere else. The pace of innovation, it's not about 6 months or 1 year before someone overtakes you. It's going to be within a matter of months. So you've got to be fast. But when you explain, ready, fire, aim, the first thought that comes to mind is, wouldn't it be quite messy?
Yeah, so very often people ask the question, are there situations where you wouldn't practice ready, fire, then aim? So in what circumstances? I think there are certain circumstances that perhaps one wouldn't do. And those circumstances can be where perhaps the number of customers is not so large. And these are the customers that typically are quite formal in the way they deal with you. So like enterprise customers, I think it would be very difficult for a person to enter and try to pitch to an enterprise customer with a half-constructed, half-baked product, and perhaps even with a half-baked presentation. You wouldn't last very long in those companies which are very formal setting. So in those cases, you really need to do the research, understand what is it the customer really needs, be able to address those pain points, and be able to, in a way, validate what is the value and how do you address that particular need, and be able to put together a presentation that would really ignite the interest of the sector. Another case, I think, in which you wouldn't use this whole concept of ready, fire, then aim, is when you are entering in a highly regulated market. Because any government that is going to look at your product needs to be able to have scientific, lab-based validation of your claims. And so it cannot use any half-baked product. It needs a complete product, or at least a complete, a decent prototype that it could test and validate your claims. Make sure that it's not injurious to the society. Make sure that it basically meets what it is that you claim in the product brochures. So from those two angles, you probably shouldn't do ready, fire, then aim.
So ready, fire, aim works best when speed to market is key and is less about having the perfect product and quality. It is when also you have customers that are also willing to explore together what the solutions is. And so if you were to spend the entire time conceptualizing the end product without actually piloting that with a customer, then the risk is that you would have spent time on something that the customer actually doesn't want. And so making sure that you get your first version out there to be sufficient to show that you have the competencies and approach could be sufficient for you to really start working with the customer. And the other thing, and that we know investing in early stage teams, is that product and business decisions can be cost corrected. A company goes through pivots all the time. We do know that the first business plan isn't going to be the last business plan. What you offer as a first solution may not necessarily be your product winner at the end of the year, or the second year or third year, when you introduce new products and solutions after talking to more customers and having been in the market. So we understand that product and business decisions can be cost corrected. The team needs to understand that and then approach it. And that's what ready, fire, aim is about.
Yeah, I think you put it together quite well. So those are the things that perhaps leads us to think, when do we use this whole concept of ready, fire, then aim? Of course, then the question is also, we started off by saying how important a market it is. And we can see that it is very much validated by what's happening out there in industry. For example, you have cases like DeepMind's AlphaFold, which is into protein structure predictions. And you also have PST Quantum's photonic path to fault tolerant quantum. You have also Alchemia's quantum-inspired physics plus AI engine for drug discovery. So many a times you see all these wonderful technologies that's coming up from the laboratories, and from the laboratories it gets into the market and creates a completely new possibilities, new industries, new ways of addressing fundamental needs out there. So in the deep tech market, we've seen it penetrating many of the very fundamental societal challenges, including green energy, including climate change, including new drug discoveries that cure specific problems. It is interesting that we always ask ourselves, last time we have always been using bits to create wealth. Now it's actually going from bits to atoms. So when bits help us to understand more of how molecular behavior, atomic behavior, and helps to create new things. So that's really the world we are in, and we can see this shift that's going from very simple, basic problem solved within the computer arena to the computer going into the real world and solving very fundamental problems in society.
And that's exactly where I'm most excited about, where we are most excited about, right? The amount of possibilities that we see these days from bits to atoms. If we look at the space economy, it is seeing constant revenue growth, right? Expanding from 8% to some 546 billion in 2022 and expected to climb another 41% over the subsequent 5 years. Just an example, Axiom Space, a venture focusing on development of the first commercial successor to the International Space Station. And that's very exciting. It is a very compelling case study of how early contractual acquisition in such capital-intensive sectors actually guarantees this future market also. And in the energy sector, we talk about early movers also in this episode. So take the space economy as an example. It is seeing constant revenue growth, expanding 8% to 546 billion in 2022 and is projected to climb for another 41%. Now, as an example of getting into the market early, we have the company called Axiom Space. It is a venture focusing on the development of the first commercial successor to the International Space Station and is an example of how they actually did an early contractual acquisition in such a capital-intensive sector to guarantee a future revenue and a market. In the energy sector, as an example, early movers in areas such as advanced materials can achieve superior competitive defenses through patenting their process or technology, and this locks in the long-term sustainability advantage. Take hydrogen, for example, the company that produces green hydrogen through a novel electrolysis technology. Through the patents surrounding their solution, and they are now working on greater capacity green hydrogen production, they are able to secure a leading position in the development of AEM technology in the production of green hydrogen with the use of renewable energy. When you start early, you have fewer competitors, and there's greater chance of acquiring market share and gaining more experience than others. And time helps build a stronger business as you start accumulating experience. And that's why getting to the market is so important.
So we have talked about how important deep tech is coming into the market, solving societal issues, and how it has grown a lot. Perhaps a lot of people have not noticed its growth. And I think what you mentioned at the first part of this podcast of its rapid growth, and now about 20%, the entire venture capital world. So it's not only solving but deep problems, but it also is an area where prosperity can be found. Of course, that brings us to another important question, is that while speed is useful, the direction is everything. You could be ready, fire, then aim, but ultimately the missile must hit the target. So you want to make sure you fire in the generally correct direction and not fire in a completely wrong direction, because then even course correction may be too difficult. So in the next podcast, I think we will probably want to dwell a little bit about this question, about taking the right direction. And so perhaps at this point in time, we will just want to say goodbye so that we can now move on to the next episode. And hopefully the listeners will continue to join us in this part. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for listening.